Okay, so today, a bit of a touchy subject, but I am going to be talking all about book censorship, because in the publishing industry right now, there seems to be a big wave of censorship going on. I don't think it's okay, and I want to talk about it with you guys. Now, you can feel free to agree or disagree with me in the comments. Let's just try and keep things respectful so that we can converse like two decent human beings. Which, yes, I know, that's a lot to ask on the internet. Whether I agree or disagree with what an author writes, I am never going to feel comfortable with another company, a publishing company, or an estate, editing their work without their permission. Something about that just doesn't feel right to me, and more often than not, the whole purpose is just to make more profit on that author's work. The thing is, books are a product of their time, for the good and the bad. They offer a window to look back at how this author viewed the world. We can see, how politics and stuff of that time affected the author's writing and their viewpoints, and again, for the good and the bad. As soon as somebody else starts adding to or editing the work of an author without their permission, it becomes something else entirely. It's no longer that original work. And I just think it is very dangerous to try and make the past more palatable, because you don't learn anything that way. And I think if you look back at history, if anything, it's taught us that censorship does a lot more harm than it does good. Trying to erase something in history because you don't agree with it that's not good. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think that history should be changed to make people feel better. I think that erasing history, that's just such a slippery slope. Book censorship kind of reminds me of book burning, and that's not a good vibe, so we need to discuss this. You probably heard the big news that Puffin Books, an imprint of Penguin Books, is working to rewrite new editions of Roald Dahl's books and basically censoring a bunch of stuff. Also, the James Bond books are being censored as well, and Goosebumps by R.L. Stine. And why not? Let's start off by talking about Goosebumps, then I'll circle back and talk about Roald Dahl. I read a lot of Goosebumps growing up. It is the second highest selling children's book series other than Harry Potter. It sold over 400 million copies in 35 different languages, having once sold more than 4 million copies in 1 month. Now, the publisher, Scholastic, has now been re-releasing these with edits made, and they've been editing out mentions of race, gender, weight, and anything that they deem harmful to children in the modern day. Here's the thing, originally all these articles went up saying that R.L. Stine himself was making these edits. Now that, I think, is a completely different story. If a living author wants to change their work, that's completely within their rights. Even if you don't think it's necessary, it's within their rights. That's totally fine. But as it turns out, that was a complete lie. After getting a ton of tweets pleading that he should leave Goosebumps alone, R.L. Stine announced that this story is false. He has never changed a word of a Goosebumps novel, and then he goes on to say that he was never even made aware of these changes. The proposed edits were never shown to him. Since 2018, more than 100 edits have been made to the Goosebumps books, and R.L. Stine was completely unaware. Now, you may have thought, being Goosebumps, that they were trying to censor out some of the scary parts because they thought it was just too scary for children. I mean, R.L. Stine he's no stranger to censorship.
Hello, I'm R.L. Stine.
His Goosebumps series came in number 15 on a list of the 100 most frequently challenged books of the 1990s, and then was dropped to number 94 on the same list in the 2000s. He's always written kind of edgy stories for children, but that's not what the censorship was for. It wasn't for any of the scary stuff. Examples of some of the edits include characters now being described as cheerful rather than plump. A reference to a villain making their victim a slave has now been removed, while the word crazy has also been swapped for silly, which is absolutely crazy. I didn't know crazy is offensive now. I feel like the word crazy is a word you're going to see in a lot of books, and I don't see how it's harmful. References to any character's weight, such as resembling a bowling ball and having squirrel cheeks, have been stripped from the novels. Comments like a real nut is now a real wild one, and a nutcase is now weirdo. And Scholastic told The Times that it had made the changes to keep the language current and avoid imagery that could negatively impact a young person's view of themselves today, with a particular focus on mental health. Honestly, I don't think any kid reading these books and seeing the word crazy or a nutcase is realistically going to care at all. As for mentions of characters being overweight, I do think it's unfortunate that there is that stereotype in a lot of books where antagonists or bullies are described as being overweight, but that doesn't give publishers the right to go and change it, and that shouldn't be necessary. To put it bluntly, if someone is so offended by seeing the word fat or crazy within a book, then they're never going to be able to live in the real world. Kids are very intelligent, they're not as sensitive as people think they are, and Goosebumps is just a lot of fun. I don't think these changes were really necessary at all, but I especially do not think it was okay for them to not even tell the author that they're making these changes. And again, a lot of these happened all the way back in 2018, and he was only made aware of them now when people on Twitter, started tweeting at him. Personally, I don't agree with Scholastic doing that. I think they at least should have reached out to R.L. Stine to let him know. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about Roald Dahl for a moment. Roald Dahl, he was definitely a product of his time. He was not a saint by any means. He was an anti-Semitic, he was racist, and some of that even showed in his earlier works. Just go and look at the history of the Oompa Loompas in Willy Wonka. It wasn't good. It was definitely not good. And his editors worked with him to change those things, and thankfully those changes were made because the stories would be much different if they had not been. While he definitely had some bad viewpoints, Roald Dahl was also very passionate about getting children to read more books and creating a generation of readers. And he did that. I mean, his books have sold over 300 million copies. They've been translated into 63 different languages, and they've had a ton of adaptations. I mean, he's written some of the best children's stories, like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, The Big Friendly Giant, James and the Giant Peach, Fantastic Mr. Fox. While he clearly had some bad prejudice and problematic opinions in real life, there's no arguing that he went on to inspire tons of generations of readers, and they've brought a lot of joy to people's lives. Now, I do own this box set of Roald Dahl books. I'm gonna be honest, I haven't read any of these stories in ages, and most of my experience with Dahl is in all the adaptations, many of which are still some of my favorites. And from what I hear now, the books do hold up quite well, and there's still tons of children that enjoy reading them. And I just think as soon as an author is dead, you need to leave the book alone. You can make new editions of it, but you cannot change the words of the author to make a profit. And the thing is that it's kind of hiding who the author was. It's giving a false image of who this author is. But no, history should not be changed. People should be made aware who Roald Dahl was, and that he did have some very problematic opinions and thoughts. People should be made aware of that and be able to choose if they want to separate the art from the artist and still enjoy his books. And why try to make somebody look better than they were instead of trying to inform people of the truth and why it wasn't okay? Now, these revisions have been worked on by sensitivity readers from an organization called Inclusive Minds, which describes itself as a collective for people who are passionate about inclusion, diversity, equality, and accessibility in children's literature, and are committed to changing the face of children's books. So journalists have analyzed hundreds of these revisions that have to do with gender, race, weight, mental health, and violence, and many of them have been cut or rewritten. Now, this includes removing words such as fat and ugly, as well as descriptions using the colors black and white. In James and the Giant Peach, Miss Sponge is no longer described as the fat one, Miss Spider's head is no longer described as black, and the earthworm no longer has lovely pink skin, but lovely smooth skin. Guys, it's a spider and an earthworm. Also, why does black need to be censored? That seems like we're going backwards. They've also removed the mention of faces turning white or turning red with anger. In my opinion, we shouldn't be removing descriptors, and also we shouldn't be teaching children that black is a bad word to say. There shouldn't be a negative connotation to that, and by censoring it, I think they're actually doing more harm and not what they are intending to do. References to Rudyard Kipling and Joseph Conrad in Matilda have now been changed to Jane Austen and John Steinbeck, which why? I don't really understand how John Steinbeck is a better option. I don't know, seems kind of unnecessary to me. In The Witches, a reference to witches being undercover, in whatever job they're in. For instance, working as a cashier in a supermarket or typing letters for businessmen has now been changed to working as a top top scientist or running a business. In the Twits, Mrs. Twit is no longer described as ugly and beastly, but just beastly, because apparently ugly is just too offensive. Now in The Witches, when referring to the witches wearing wigs, the original text says, "You can't go around pulling the hair of every lady you meet, even if she is wearing gloves. Just you try it and see what happens." The new censored version says, "Besides, there are plenty of other reasons why women might wear wigs, and there's certainly nothing wrong with that." I'm sorry, but this just seems kind of ridiculous. I understand they're trying to not stigmatize women wearing wigs, but this entire line just feels so clunky and out of place, and it completely takes away that humor that was originally there, and I just don't think there was any need to change this whatsoever. Now I'm gonna have to agree with Booker Prize winner Sir Salman, who tweeted that Roald Dahl was no angel, but this is absurd censorship. A spokesperson for Mr. Sunak's, the Prime Minister of the UK, said that when it comes to our rich and varied literary heritage, the PM agrees with the big friendly giant that you shouldn't gobblefunk around with words. And goes on to share the Prime Minister's thoughts that "I think it's important that works of literature and works of fiction are preserved and not airbrushed. We have always defended the right to free speech and expression." The CEO of Pen of America, a group of 7,000 writers advocating for freedom of expression, tweeted out to say that she was alarmed by these changes and warned that the power to rewrite books could be abused. She added that amidst fierce battles against book bans and strictures on what can be taught and read, selective editing to make works of literature conform to particular sensibilities could represent a dangerous new weapon. Those who might cheer specific edits to Dahl's work should consider how the power to rewrite books might be used in the hands of those who do not share their values and sensibilities. There are so many amazing and talented children's authors right now that are writing some incredible works, and the attention should be put on these new authors rather than trying to change the dated works of these classic authors to make them more palatable. There is so many other books out there, and really there should just be more funding put into advertising these modern authors. Let me just say that you are not entitled to the creation of others. You're not entitled to the labor of others. And you're not entitled to control the language of others. Yes, you can alter a text. Take, for example, the edited versions of Shakespeare where they've taken out some of the naughty bits and the heresy and all the raunchy parts. But the thing is, that becomes an altered text. It's not the original work anymore, and it shouldn't be advertised as so. I do not think it's good to go back to an author's work and change the context in which it was written and change, everything to make it more inclusive for readers nowadays. I think once an author has passed on, you need to leave their work alone. And yes, you can enjoy something while still acknowledging that times have changed, and this particular part is no longer okay. Take, for example, fans of H.P. Lovecraft. I am sure the majority of Lovecraft fans do not agree with the author's views. Censorship, even with good intentions, is a very slippery path to hell, and yeah, we should stop doing it. I think the more important thing is to teach our children the difference between fact and fiction and right and wrong. Teaching kids critical thinking, I think, is vital, rather than censoring everything that the world of children's literature has to offer them. In pretty much all of Roald Dahl's work, there's a lot of morals at the heart of the story that teach really great lessons. I think it'd be totally fine if there is a brief disclaimer at the beginning of the book just stating that, this was a different time. Some of the wording or content may be offensive now, instead of opening up the can of worms of changing an author's work. I'm an advocate that history shouldn't be erased. The beliefs and language and mindsets of people from the past should not have a 2023 lens put on them. The past already happened, there's good and bad people, and I think we need to face those bad parts in order to be self-reflective. Just like all the book banning going on, censorship is also appalling. Censorship opens the door to modify and erase anything. There is a place for classics, and they should be discussed with the context of what may be wrong with them, not edited to hide what's wrong with them. Now, I actually filmed this video you're watching like 3 weeks ago. I didn't get around to editing it until now, but I just stumbled upon Bookborn's video on the subject. By the way, go check out her channel. She makes a lot of great content, and in her video, she touches on some really excellent points that I didn't in mine, so I'd recommend watching that as well if you're interested in this conversation. Anyways, that's my opinion on book censorship. Let me know what you think in the comments. Maybe you agree with me, or maybe you disagree and you think that this is actually a good tool to introduce these classics to a new generation? I'm open to discuss in the comments. Anyways, as always, a big huge thank you to my patrons.